It was late in the evening when I reached the place. I heard one or two gunshots in the bar room as I came up, and I disliked going in, but there was nowhere else to go, and it was a cold night. Inside the room were several men who, including the bartender, were wearing the kind of smile worn by men who are making believe to like what they don't like. A shabby individual in a broad hat with a cocked gun in each hand was walking up and down the floor, talking with strident profanity. He had evidently been shooting at the clock, which had 2 or 3 holes in its face. As soon as he saw me, he hailed me as Four Eyes, in reference to my spectacles, of course, and said, "Four Eyes is going to treat." I joined in the laugh and got behind the stove and sat down, thinking to escape notice. However, he followed me, and though I tried to pass it off as a jest, this merely made him more offensive, and he stood leaning over me, a gun in each hand, using very foul language. In response to his reiterated command that I should set up the drinks, I said, "Well, if I've got to, I've got to," and I rose, looking past him. As I rose, I struck quick and hard with my right just to one side of the point of his jaw, hitting with my left as I straightened out, and then again with my right. He fired the guns, but I don't know whether this was merely a convulsive action of his hands or whether he was trying to shoot at me. When he went down, he struck the corner of the bar with his head. If he had moved, I was about to drop on my knees, but he was senseless. I took away his guns, and other people in the room, who were now loud in their denunciation of him, hustled him out and put him in the shed. Theodore Roosevelt.
John Fisher Satterthwaite was a Civil War veteran, businessman, financier, and real estate developer. In 1880, he bought 50 blocks of land in El Paso, Texas. He graded the land and laid water and gas pipes. By 1885, he had built more than 90 houses. The suburb was known as the Satterthwaite Addition, later known as Sunset Heights, in 1889. In this 1920 newspaper article, Satterthwaite gives an account of El Paso's violent past. El Paso police had their headquarters in George Look's saloon on El Paso Street and kept cases for gamblers between calls back in the early 80s, according to John Fisher Satterthwaite, a prominent citizen of El Paso at the time. Mr. Satterthwaite was the first park commissioner of El Paso, receiving the appointment in 1882 and serving for 5 years. He admits responsibility for the alligators in Jacinto Plaza. He said he brought 3 of them here from New Orleans in a cigar box. 1 died, but the 2 original gators are still in the park. He came to El Paso from San Antonio by stage and was 9 days making the trip. The stage turned over twice in 1 day, and he carries a scar on one hand to this day as a result of one of the overturnings. Satterthwaite said, "I bought the Hart survey of land, about 360 acres extending from the river along the north side of the railroad tracks, east to what is now Campbell Street and north to the mountains. My land included a large part of what is now San Jacinto Plaza, and I donated it to the city. The city later stole Carnegie Square from me. I spent $86,000 grading streets through my land and selling lots. When the railroad came here in 1881, the city filled up with thugs, gamblers, and thieves of all sorts. Citizens had to arm themselves with shotguns and sit out on the streets at night to preserve order. Things became so bad, Dallas Stoudenmire was bought here from Indian Territory to clean up the town. He had a record of killing 4 men. He was sworn in at what served for City Hall, a room in a beer saloon down San Francisco Street, known as the Halfway House. Later it was known as Charlie Blesswinger's place. He, Stoudenmire, then sauntered down the street, a long linen duster on and a pistol in each pocket. At the corner of San Antonio and El Paso streets, he was hissed at by a gang there. He pulled his pistols and shot and killed the 4 men. No inquest was held. Sam Boring, a real estate man, had a reputation as a sheriff and city marshal in California, was sworn in as assistant to Stoudenmire and immediately secured from somewhere a ton of balls and chains. Summoning citizens with shotguns, they rounded up all the undesirables and marched them into a corral, where he locked the balls and chain on them. Then he stationed citizens with their shotguns loaded with small shot on the roofs of the adobe buildings around San Jacinto Plaza, and taking 50 of his prisoners out of the stockade, he marched them to the plaza, where he took the hardware off and told them to go to work helping me in the park. One of the men attracted his attention to something, and the others, relieved of their balls and chains, started running. This was what Boring had counted on, and was the signal for the men on the roofs armed with shotguns to begin firing. The shot was only large enough to sting good and hard. Those undesirables never quit running until they had permanently left El Paso. 50 more were treated in the same way. That night, anybody could walk along any street in El Paso in perfect safety, and that was the end of the Reign of Terror. For El Paso. We had a semblance of law and order from that time forward. The news spread all over the country among bad men that El Paso was an unhealthy place for them.